Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. Tensions are rising once again in the Horn of Africa, a region where sea access, sovereignty, and foreign rivalries collide. Into that uncertainty, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made his first trip to Ethiopia in more than a decade. During his visit, the two sides signed multiple agreements spanning energy cooperation and expanded trade. But Erdogan also delivered a warning. The Horn must not become an arena for outside powers seeking to inflame divisions.
We believe
that the region's problems should be solved by the countries of the region themselves, and that the Horn of Africa should not be turned into a battleground for foreign powers. In this context, I want to reiterate that Israel's recognition of Somaliland has benefited neither Somalia nor the Horn of Africa.
This was not Ankara's first attempt at mediation in the region. In 2024, Turkey helped defuse a dangerous standoff between Somalia and Ethiopia after a controversial Somaliland port deal threatened wider instability. Now, Israel's recent recognition of the breakaway region has reignited tensions. And again, Ethiopia is turning to Ankara, this time seeking its support in a renewed bid for sea access. But could that request reshape alliances and test the fragile balance across East Africa? For more, joining me now from Istanbul is Mehmet Özkan, a Turkish National Defense University professor. From Addis Ababa, Moses Crispus Okello, a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies in the Horn of Africa Security Analysis Program. And from Nairobi, Hassan Kananje, director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. A lot going on in the Horn of Africa, and while all this is going on, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visiting Ethiopia, an important visit, and there's a lot I want to unpack. But before we get into the regional ramifications, Mehmet, bilaterally, why was this an important visit for Turkey?
I think this visit has three aims. First, it has economic dimensions. It's very clear with regard to airport issue. I think the second one was deep in the bilateral relations. Third one was related to the regional politics. In that sense, in a sense, they all merge in a way that made this visit extremely important. Of course, many spotlight was on the regional politics. But I think also bilateral relation has been extremely important because since 2021, yes, there has been a deep relation between Turkey and Ethiopia, but still some aspects were missing, including some regional tensions has been impacting some bilateral relations. In a sense, this visit has been extremely important. So far, what we have seen is that at least they come a mutual understanding of each other. That at least they will keep communicating for the future of the regional politics and also to deep relations at bilateral level.
Moses, why was this visit important for Ethiopia?
Thanks, Yusuf. Yusuf, you might know that Turkey is probably one of the longest serving diplomatic relationships with Ethiopia on the African continent. And given that history of that diplomatic relation, the two countries have had historically a somewhat rocky relationship. But after 1991, that relationship has been improving and dramatically. So as of 17th February, when Erdogan visited Ethiopia, you could say that the intention, or at least the benefits for Ethiopia are great. As Mehmet said, trade is a very important part of that benefit. But as the relationship strengthens, Ethiopia and Turkey are also escalating their ambitions in areas of political influence and in areas of security relationships. So for Ethiopia, this is probably one of those relationships that is going to project Ethiopia's ambitions into one that makes it something of a hegemony in the Horn of Africa region.
Mm-hmm. Hassan, both Mehmet and Moses basically highlighted the regional backdrop. And obviously, anyone who was previewing this visit, that was also the headline, the regional backdrop of the visit, when generally the focus is on bilateral relations. When you look at that agenda that could be identified as regional, what are the most important topics for you?
Well, I think the first thing, Erdogan's visit to Ethiopia is significant, and it underscores the increasing relevance of Ethiopia, not just of Turkey, not just as a diplomatic, power, but as an economic power in the region, perhaps with the largest soft power in recent years. Now, a number of things, of course, stand out. One is to do with economics, especially the energy sector. We know that the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia holds a lot of vitality to Ethiopia, but also to its prospects for growth. Just about 50% of Ethiopians have access to electricity. And so any collaboration in this sector, I think, is going to be very critical in revitalizing the Ethiopian economy. But also geopolitically, it is significant. It coming, of course, of the heels of Israeli recognition of Somaliland, which did not go down very well regionally as well as continentally. And I think also underscores the increasing interest of Ethiopia, of Turkey as a mediator, considering that the previous challenge that Ethiopia had with Somalia over Somaliland was actually mediated by Ankara. And so this not only underscores the increasing diplomatic role, but places at the center of geopolitics within the region, but also as a peacemaker, especially at the time when the traditional powers in the West have been pulling back when it comes to diplomatic engagement in the region.
Now, Mehmet, I think one of the big questions is sea access, obviously. That's something that Ethiopia has coveted a lot, a landlocked country. And as both Moses and Hassan mentioned, Ethiopia's ambitions are growing. And part of that ambition is having sea access. There was a very provocative deal, let's say, or at least speak of a deal with Somaliland before. And that's something that Ethiopia has backed away from, but they still want sea access, whether that's going to be via Somalia, via Eritrea, that remains to be seen. What can Turkey do for Ethiopia on this issue?
I think Turkey has two perspectives on this. First, Turkey is trying to find a way that Ethiopia can have an access to the sea. That is why 2024 was the whole year of negotiation and mediation between Turkey, between Ethiopia and Somalia. I mean, in December 2024, they signed an agreement, principal agreement in Ankara, as you know. But the second one is that the sea access issue should not create a security problem in the region, which is in latest development, including some recognition of Somaliland and other issues, they are sort of paving the way for creating this issue as a security issue. So sea access should be separated from the recognition of Somaliland. If they are interlinked, and if there are more international or more outside actors involved in the region, that can create further security problem, which is already prevalent in the region, through terrorist organization, Shabab and other issues. So Turkey is trying to separate these issues. I mean, Somaliland case is different case, different issue that should be dealt, that should be spoken differently. But sea access issue is a different issue. So Turkey's perspective in that sense to align with a little bit with Ethiopia, that Ethiopia should not be part of this negative agenda in the region. That is the main perspective of Turkey, and that's why Turkey's approach to Ethiopia has been partly shaped through this perspective.
Mm-hmm. Moses, I mean, when you look at the sea access issue, from an Ethiopian perspective, what's the ideal solution, but what's also the solution that Ethiopia expects Turkey to come up with? And is the ideal one versus the expected solution the same?
That's an interesting question, Yusuf. And the nature of the conversation that happened between Abiy and Erdogan kind of reflects the complexity of this sea access quest. I mean, you will recall that Erdogan condemned Israel's recognition of Somaliland, which could have been one of the routes through which Ethiopia pursues this ambition. But at the same time, he made reference to this idea of solving regional problems among regional countries. Now, immediately, this kind of it gives us a double-edged dilemma. On the one hand, Erdogan would have loved to support Abiy's quest to gain access to the sea, but at the same time, he would not have wanted to jeopardize that relationship. Whilst, on the other hand, Abiy would have wanted to enlist Erdogan into his sphere of compatriots who support this idea. So this is a somewhat delicate balance for both Turkey and Addis Ababa. Ideally, it's not quite clear how Ethiopia intends to actualize this sea access idea. The positions have shifted over time. From 2018, when it was first propagated, when Abiy had just come into power. It has shifted between that time and 2024, when the MOU was signed. Right now, it is linked to an existential a dilemma within Ethiopia. So you would want to argue that maybe, on the one hand, some kind of economic integration framework could help Ethiopia access the sea. But on the other hand, it's not quite clear at the extent of the access required. So I would say that until the actual desires are sufficiently articulated, we are going to remain prevaricating around this complex kind of gray zone.
Hassan, how did Ethiopia receive Israel's recognition of Somaliland? I mean, did it look at it as, oh, this is my opportunity to bring that deal that we abandoned back to the agenda? Or, no, we need to be patient right now. This could cause more problems than solutions.
I think in Addis Ababa, there's been some kind of ambivalence, both excitement as well as ambivalence. Ambivalence informed by the fact that the regional dynamics did not seem to favor Addis' unilateral position when they signed an MOU, but also optimistic in the sense that perhaps there is room that this may provide an added pressure to be able to make a compromise. I do agree with my colleague, Okello, that within a regional integrative framework, Ethiopia is not a landlocked country, it's actually a land-linked country, and that can be able to guarantee access to the sea, and not just one, but perhaps several. Now, that may not be the most ideal position, perhaps, that they may be looking for, but that's the most practical position, or at least results that may come from this framework, because outside a negotiated access to the sea is going to be increasingly difficult to see that any unilateral decision is going to be successful, especially within the context of the regional geopolitics.
I feel like with each question, we're building a web that's bringing more and more countries. So let's go to the next layer. I mean, very recently, Mehmet, we've seen Turkey's foreign policy, especially in the Horn, aligning more and more with Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Do you see Erdogan having more confidence, having the Saudis and the Egyptians more on board with Turkish foreign policy in that region?
I think in principle, yes. Turkey wants in the Horn of Africa a regional stability, because that Turkey has been investing a lot in all sense, in security and in otherwise. And Turkey wants a stabilizing region now. And the fact that, Saudi Arabia and Egypt is sort of wants to play that role, contributing to that positive process, is a very good welcome, and Turkey is receiving that signal positively. But the issue is, sometimes issue can go beyond these three countries as well, because Ethiopia is very key country in that region, and also the issue of Somaliland is very key. So if the actors can cooperate, can work together, I agree with Hassan that Ethiopia can be a land-linked country, and at the same time there could be a regional beneficial scenario for each of them. But otherwise, if each actor, domestic in the region or from outside, if they keep pushing security creating agendas or conflicting agendas, then the region is likely to end up a more unstable area. So that will not be beneficial for any of them. In that sense, Turkey is sort of welcoming all the positive support that's coming from outside, including from the United States.
Mm-hmm. So Moses, let's add another layer and bring in the UAE and Israel as well. How is Ethiopia balancing its relations, its dialogue, its diplomacy with its interests, but also this web of actors that are also looking at Somalia, at Ethiopia, Somaliland, Kenya, and other countries in the region as well?
Yusuf, Ethiopia is treating a very delicate geopolitical environment at this point in time. And as you've mentioned, that environment includes a resurgent Turkey on the one hand, and on the other, you've got the likes of UAE that, together with Saudi Arabia and Turkey, compete for trade relations with Ethiopia. So there is the need to manage those relationships. But at the same time, Ethiopia is being pulled into this a sphere of influence that is managed by Turkey, a sphere of influence that is much more pronounced in Somalia, but is now absorbing Turkey, rather Ethiopia into it, and very quickly bringing Ethiopia and Egypt into the same space. So this is a very delicate dance, if you wish, because within the countries that are coming in this sphere of influence, there's so many other delicate issues to address. Hassan already mentioned the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, which is in that space. Ethiopia's relationship with Somalia seems to have improved at this point in time, but it may go south anytime. So there is within this space some very complex relationships, and of course, within that you also have a Saudi Arabia and UAE, who are already having a fight in Yemen, and by some accounts that fight has been extended to Ethiopia. So I think the best I can say is that this is one of those relationships that Ethiopia manages on a day-by-day basis, but ultimately it's a complex web of relations that cannot be understood in a symmetrical fashion.
Hassan, when Ethiopians are looking at the Turkish-Somali relationship, how much it's expanded. I mean, biggest embassy Turkey has, military base, spaceport being built, maritime and defense deal, now research for oil and gas. Does Ethiopia view that as a positive, saying Turkey is the right country to talk with because it has a lot of leverage? Or do they view that relationship as suspicion, with the Turks are too invested in Somalia that they're kind of on Somalia's side more than Ethiopia's side?
I think they look at it with both worry as well as optimism. And worry in the sense that the deepened engagement, of course, with Somalia seems to give Somalia a qualitative diplomatic edge when it comes to the regional dynamics. However, they recognize that considering the rate at which, of course, the Ethiopian economy needs investors, Turkey being the second largest investor in Ethiopia outside China, they realize they're going to need to expand their relations with Turkey. And of course, Turkey also has other intangibles that can bring to bear that other middle powers as well as great powers have failed to do in recent years. And so, while there could be segments within the Ethiopian body politic who may look at some of these engagements suspiciously, I think the key decision makers recognize the importance of Turkey with regard to the recent history, but also the increasing relevance, not just in its economy, but in the defense industry, as well as within the region, as probably the most influential middle power when it comes to diplomacy in the entire Horn and Eastern African region.
Mm-hmm. Mehmet, I want viewers to understand what's at stake here, because, I mean, when they look at Turkey, Somalia, Ethiopia, other countries in this mix, it's kind of distant for them, but there's actually a lot at stake. I mean, a year from now, best case scenario, worst case scenario, where do you see a best case or worst case result?
I think the worst case scenario is that the region is infected again with the crisis and conflict. That would be the worst case scenario for everyone else. But the best case scenario is that everybody's benefiting from this international interest to the region, including space issue, oil issue, and other issues. That's the best case scenario. But the Turkish perspective to the region is that now it is beyond bilateral relations. In the past, Turkey was looking more bilateral relations with the Horn of Africa. Now Turkey is looking more at regional perspective, and Turkey understands that if there is no regional stability, if there is no regional, understanding, it is impossible to maintain bilateral relations at peace and at stability. That's why Turkey is now trying to interlink regional and bilateral relations. That's why Turkey is paying attention to Kenya, to Ethiopia, to Djibouti, to Somalia, to Somaliland at the same time. So this is the overall balance. I think what has been lacking in the region is regional order. If Turkey and other countries, also regional countries, can contribute to establish a regional order in the Horn of Africa, that would be ultimately beneficial for everyone, for the society, for economy, for politics, and also for the regional security.
Moses, is there a role for the African Union to play here, or any outside actor that we haven't mentioned that could come in and play a game-changing role?
It would. The African Union is definitely one of those multilateral actors that helps to manage relationships among all the 54 African countries. On whether it's welcome to interfere in a bilateral relationship between Ethiopia and Turkey, I'm not very sure, but I would be obviously. I would imagine that the AU is very keenly observing how the involvement of the relationship between Turkey and Ethiopia helps to ameliorate some of the situations around the region. I mean, you will recall that the African Union expressed support for the Turkish-Somalia declaration, which improved relationship between those two countries. In some ways, the African Union has also been welcoming of Turkish proposals in other areas. So in a way, I would see that the Union as an intergovernmental agency would want to be careful how it gets involved in this kind of decisions, but certainly it would not want to be left out of the room, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't planning on asking about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance, Dan, but both Moses and Hassan, you've touched upon it, so I don't want to avoid it either. Obviously, a very important issue for Ethiopia, one that's caused tension with the Egyptians as well. An important project, one of the marquee projects for not only Ethiopia, but also the region. What's the status of the dam right now regarding the views of regional countries? And do you expect that to be a major issue that could impact bilateral relations, not only with neighbors, but also countries from the outside, the one or two layers of that web we were talking about, in their bilateral relationships with Ethiopia?
I think the views of neighboring countries with regard to the Grand Renaissance Dam hasn't changed, especially the Nile countries. Of course, outside the complexity going on in Sudan, and so you do not know how the outcome is going to be of this conflict. I think many of the Nile Basin countries, they've fairly been consistent in their approach to it, and many of them, prefer a negotiated, settlement to the problem. Of course, this is an issue that has caused fissures between Addis Ababa and Cairo, but it's not exactly something that neighboring countries are extremely fearful that's going to cause a major conflict. However, the fear within the region is that there may be some proxy conflicts as a result of serious disagreements over the dam. But right now, that prospect seems to be unlikely. I think what concerns today the region is the immediate interstate tensions that we're witnessing within the region, as well as the recent recognition of Somaliland. But of course, the dam is something that is very important to the region. Countries in the region are already benefiting from that dam, including Kenya, and it looks like that dependence is going to be expanded to other regional countries. And so within, I think, the African Union mechanisms, as well as other international partners, there is increased prospect that this is an issue that's going to be negotiated, or rather to bring about an acceptable solution. It may take time because when you look at the terms of disagreement, actually the points are not very great. It's just about the time of the filling of the dam.
Gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. Mehmet, Moses, Hassan, thanks for helping me unpack this issue. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.